Welcome to AuthentiCity FM, episode number 39. I'm your co-host, Mike Sable. I'm joined, as always, by my friends and colleagues, Phil Corrali and Corey Spiegel. And if you have ever wondered how Ted Lasso, Wonder Woman, Jesse Pinkman, and Catalina Dressing all weave into one coherent story, stick around. We'll see you on the other side. We are excited for this episode. It's summer in the Midwest, and so we're kind of diving into a number of things. So number one, a little bit of explanation is in order. So Ted Lasso, obviously the World Cup fever is real in the United States. We're going to talk a lot about World Cup travelers in our things, and also about how discernment ends when curiosity stops. And if you've ever watched Ted Lasso, you know that there's a section, one of the most famous scenes about curiosity. So we're going to dive into that. Wonder Woman is sort of an interesting one because she had that invisible plane, and we also lose, like, things become invisible when they become familiar to us. And so that's one of the things that we're going to dive into. Jesse Pinkman is a little bit of a stretch because that reminds me of Breaking Bad, which reminds me of Bryan Cranston, which reminds me of the greatest role he ever played, which was the dad in Malcolm in the Middle. And often city managers are trapped in this awkward middle between truth and fact. And so we're going to dive into that. Lastly, Catalina dressing. It's this spicy French sort of dressing that's really popular. It's probably the best of all the salad dressings. We spent a lot of time talking about salads last episode. And if you're really a true purist in the Midwest, the ultimate dressing is ranch. And we will dive into that. So Corey and Phil had no idea what any of that was going to be. It was a delight to pull it together. Um, but we want to build on our last episode, which is around right sort of this discernment and the role of the city manager in kind of wrestling with things when they have multiple truths. And so this is a continuation of episode number 38. If you haven't listened to it, go back. It's super fascinating. We're really grateful that we got a lot of really good feedback from our audience and our listeners. And I think we captured something that was really important. But Corey, I just want to turn it over to you because you're on the upper left corner of my screen and it's your turn to take it over. So help us remind our audience and our listeners kind of what we talked about and where we're headed next.
Yeah, so we introduced really this idea that multiple truths exist. And that is in communities, that's in families, that's in city management. And from that lens, so you mentioned summer in the Midwest. It was very rainy this morning in the Midwest. And so I spent a little time doing some work, reading a book, and then I did something I don't normally do. And I started scrolling a little bit on social media. And I went down a rabbit hole on content creators. And if you've been with us for any amount of time, you know I'm not usually the biggest fan of social media or the algorithms, but I'm going to put that aside today and say I loved it. It brought me absolute joy for about an hour of my time because what I stumbled into were the tourists currently in America for the World Cup. And as I reflected on that today, it led me to this place where we forget sometime, right? You said what becomes invisible when it's familiar. And so watching all of these people, mainly from Europe, but really from all over the world, talk about one, what they had expected from America, and then what they've been experiencing for the last week-ish or so. And so that's really kind of where I'm going to come at from this episode, is that I think we forget or we become complacent. And that is when discernment actually gets hard because you lose sight of the whole picture.
So I saw some of that content as well. And what was fascinating to me, because what I was watching was related to Europeans and others' reactions to American food. And I was waiting for this to be like the super most awful critiques of American food, fast and otherwise. And what it was these glowing comments about going to a variety of, Chick-fil-A, going to some of the steakhouses, the steakhouse chains that are out there, and people posting about how the the portions are so huge. It's so amazing. It's such a great opportunity to experience American culture. And I'm like, wow, American culture. I don't know that Outback Steakhouse is what I would necessarily have pinned somebody from France thinking is a cultural experience. But what was so interesting about it was, again, kind of that efflorescence around it. It was so interesting, and kind of the opportunity to experience for the first time something that maybe they had heard about and perhaps had some perspective about, and then actually experience, and they're like, wow, it's a lot better than I thought it was going to be. um, and I think it's so funny because there are so many people in my world that would say, oh my God, like that's the worst. I would never in a million years bring somebody from another country to Outback Steakhouse for a cultural experience. And yet that's what they're drawn to and having a great time with. And it ties back into that point that, Mike, you were making before, of how something that's familiar or we see all the time or experience regularly becomes uninteresting. And yet when you experience it for the first time, it's this flurry of, whoa, that was fun. And it's just interesting to see other people from around the world having those experiences in that way.
So when we were talking a little bit ahead of this, we started talking through, and I think this is maybe a good place to start, what our perception as Americans was of hosting the World Cup based on the content that's been created around us, right? And so what I'd seen in the news was immigration and ICE has been a very hot topic in our country for a while now. And how is that going to impact different countries, different teams? We did see a couple stories about that leading up. That was one thing I was curious about. We talked about how expensive this experience was going to be. I'd seen so many stories about how the big hotel blocks were being given back because nobody was coming. And so that was the lens that I was seeing the World Cup through until this week. And back to the idea that multiple truths can exist. Everything I watched today and read today and really have seen the past few days was nothing like that. And I think that is what some of the content creators and just tourists, most of them are not professional content creators. These are just people on vacation, on holiday, doing probably a once in a lifetime trip. And they were talking about, as they're creating these videos, all of the perceptions that either their media or our version of Hollywood, right? Because how do you experience America? It's through our TV and our films. And what they had expected was completely different than what they've experienced so far.
So that's really interesting because I've not seen any of these things, but it totally makes sense to me that that would be kind of part of the thing because in our jobs, right? So whenever there's a proposal, there's development, there's all of these people that come up with all of this sort of outrage about, well, this is going to go wrong and this is going to go wrong and this is going to go wrong. And then you build the thing and people just go on and live their lives and they're unbothered by what that's out there. So there's a little bit of that, like that unknown, that inability to be curious about, well, maybe this would work or maybe this is going to be interesting. The other thing I want to tie into some of our earlier episodes, and Corey, you've talked about it kind of specifically, um, being a tourist in your own community and like looking at something with a fresh lens is a really important thing. And so, we get often, I don't want to say jaded and cynical, but right, we know how to run cities and we know how to run organizations. But if you do it on autopilot, if you ever don't like step back and say, oh, okay, now how might I look at this differently? We sort of miss these things. And this is one of those good reminders that, uh, you know, we do live in a pretty cool place and we do have really interesting things. And people from the outside who come and experience it, I'm glad they are going to Outback Steakhouse. I can't remember the last time I've had a bloomin' onion, but like I feel like I should go back and experience it and try it maybe a little bit differently because you're right, Phil. Like we become invisible to the things that we see every day. But so every once in a while, you got to stop, pause, turn that off, and look at it from a new lens because I bet we'll find some insights not only in our own organizations, but our professional associations. And so there's really an opportunity to kind of discern differently when we are curious. So kind of fun.
So some of the more interesting content I watched today, and we've talked about some of the restaurants, Whataburger, Chick-fil-A, Cheesecake Factory,
Yeah.
In-N-Out, lots of food content, which as an American doesn't surprise me too much, because how many times have I taken photos of food and posted it on Instagram? Like, it happens. So that wasn't particularly surprising, but one of them that made me laugh kind of hysterically was this guy from Europe is in HEB in Texas and is in the cereal aisle. Now, obviously cereal's a little different in America. And so he's like going down the row and he's showing Fruit Loops and he's like, can't find these there. There's probably some stuff in there that's not good for you. And he keeps going and he's like, now this is crazy. Do you all eat this much cereal? But then he like pans to the other side of the aisle where there's more cereal, right? And so like this consistent theme of so many different videos I watched today was kind of scale, right? We have so many restaurants and the grocery stores are going into Costco. Like an American Costco is a very big cultural phenomenon. And if you're like a Costco person, that is a destination anywhere. So how many times have you seen on social media somebody's visiting Asia or Hawaii or whatever? Like you have to go to the local Costco because it's going to be this cool cultural experience. But that is like ordinary Americana to us. And so watching people talk about the scale of things was something super fascinating. And then another thing was our fascination with ice and air conditioning, which again, if you're from Europe, maybe not the same. And if you've ever traveled to Europe, definitely not the experience we are used to here at home. But they're like, I get why you people like it here. And so it was that, for me, a very fun reminder of just how great our ordinary experiences, the things we do every day. I mean, Mike, we joked that you didn't have air conditioning last week and it was hot. But like, I have ice in my drink. It's in my fridge. Like, this is just normal. And for people who are not from here, it's this novel experience. And I think that was such a really cool thing to see through other people's eyes, what is just part of our ordinary day.
We got a new ice maker at the office today. I haven't seen people that excited about anything in I don't know how long, because nobody can say no to some good ice cubes in a glass of water or whatever you're doing. It is a very American thing. It's something we enjoy, probably more than anywhere I've ever seen. But it also ties into what you were talking about a moment ago, Corey, about scale. It's hard sometimes to remember how big the United States is up against most other parts of the world. And you don't really get it until you're driving across Montana. And you can drive for 4 hours at 80 miles an hour and not see anyone else. And it's except cattle. You'll see cattle. They're always there. But it is the scale and magnitude of the United States is sometimes it comes into some level of clarity when we talk about it in a professional sense, because when we're talking about our colleagues across the country, a state like Texas that is so physically huge, you can't get all the city managers from Texas together but for once a year, because it's, you're leaving yesterday to get there tomorrow. Because it's huge. And I think that part of our experience is unique as Americans as well. And I had the benefit of some of my relatives from Hungary came and visited back in May. And they had never been outside of Eastern Europe. And they came to Chicago, which is this booming metropolis, the third largest city in the United States. It's always humming. There's always something going on. And my one second cousin speaks English. And so, um, we were together and I asked her, I said, so, what has surprised you about the United States being here? And her comment was, it's all so fast. Like you're all moving so fast all the time. You don't ever sit still. And there's so much to see. And you walk right past it because you're in such a hurry. And I think it struck me in a moment of we were walking through the Chicago Botanic Garden, which is arguably one of the greatest botanic gardens in the United States, um, full of stuff. And I'm like, we're gonna go see the Japanese garden, and then we gotta get to the English Wald, and we're gonna. And she's like, I, I just want to slow down a little bit because there's so much, and I think we are overwhelmed sometimes with all of the things, so many things to see and so much around us and so much space, and you spread your arms and you're comfortable, right? And you don't have that in Europe. You don't have that in a lot of parts of the rest of the world. And so easy for us to forget that sometimes we do need to stop and take a look at what's around us, to perhaps understand a bit more about it. And maybe if all of us did that, including people in our communities, people on our elected boards, people who sit behind a computer screen and type their perspectives on the world, if they actually stopped and looked around a little bit, what would you see in that moment, right? What would you experience if you stopped and just like that person that just honked the horn in Mike's neighborhood, if you just stopped and paid attention to this stuff that's all around us. It's kind of a fascinating statement about American life.
So that's a perfect segue. Number one, I appreciate that you heard that in the background because that was a little bit loud, but you're right. You're something about like this discernment that does require a little bit of time. And I kind of want, when we dive into discernment, we were talking about it kind of like, right, there's these competing truths, there's these things that are kind of in tension, and we're often thrust in the middle of kind of like helping to understand and figure out this tension. Discernment is not necessarily is not neutrality, right? Having time and space to pause and look at things, and having um, staying engaged with tension is not the same as not having a position. And so, there's a lot of leaders who think that staying neutral is the safe spot to be. I don't know that you can do that as a city manager. You kind of do have to get into the mix a little bit. And then, like the other one, I was like, discernment isn't necessarily delay. Like it is like saying let's study this more is not necessarily a stalling tactic. Now it can be when weaponized, but sometimes it's about genuine information gathering. And so when you have a complicated issue like whether or not to allow a server farm or a data center in your community, a little bit of time, a little bit of pause, a little bit of slowing down is probably the right approach. And the last one, there's never going to be a consensus because as we talked about our last episode, there's going to be these competing values, and someone is going to be disappointed. And so that, this consensus, like we're all going to ultimately get along, is probably unfair. Um, and the other thing, I'll just tie all of this back into, and we talk about this piece around discernment. These visitors from other countries walked in with a clear sense of what they thought America was, right? Unsafe, violent, threatening, right? Gluttonous, all of these things. And they come and they realize, wait a minute, this place is pretty cool and this place is pretty magical. So you do have to experience the thing to have a deeper understanding of it. And so I'd be interested kind of in your comments, either related to what discernment isn't, or a little bit more about sort of the European reaction to how did they change their mind once they experienced us?
So I'll start with what discernment isn't. And one thing I'd be curious about, because we've all heard it through our careers, is time is money. And so being rushed into decisions, how many times did you have to amend an agenda for a liquor license because they didn't get their paperwork on time? It wasn't a system failure. It was a business process failure. But at least in my experience, one call to an elected about, "Oh, you're going to hurt my business," and everybody else had to stop, drop, and roll to make this thing happen. Or my personal favorite, and I say that with a heavy dose of sarcasm, the developer who needs this deal on the next agenda or the project's not going to happen. And in more than one case, the project still hasn't happened and it's many, many, many years later. And so I think somehow we got stuck in urgency. And I've been thinking about that just like in the ordinary daily life of what happens if I don't respond to a text right now? Like, Phil, you said, "Oh my God, I didn't see this earlier." I didn't care that you didn't respond 4 minutes after I sent it. Like, I somehow we decided urgency was far more important. And we've all seen the Eisenhower matrix and used it a bazillion times. But urgency became the measure of everything. And I hope we're in a reflective period where thoughtfulness, diligence, good decision making can come back into the conversation because so often what was fast was not right.
So the demand for a quick response, right, is an interesting point to make in this context, because I feel like in my formative years back in the early 2000s, there was a real sense that the only way that government was going to be better was for government to be faster, right? Government was slow. It was hokey. It was bureaucratic. The processes were terrible. Look, some of that was absolutely true, but I've had this conversation with a number of different people in a variety of different contexts, but in recent days and weeks, the interesting thing about what government is responsible for is the reaction that actually doesn't make things worse, right? So when that is true, we sometimes think about those quick reactions, those quick responses, and you don't have a lot of time to think. And there's a lot of people who believe, and I'm one of them, depending upon circumstances, that overthinking is not beneficial. But it also can be very seductive for us to fall into a routine of not thinking at all and responding quickly. Because to your point a moment ago, Corey, if the idea is that effective is quick, effective is immediate, effective is only good if I didn't have to wait for anything. Sometimes we have to wait for things. Sometimes things don't just form of their own volition with an immediate response. And we have that job. Think about it from the standpoint of something that you said, one of you said, experiencing the thing to understand it. When there's a community issue, what are we doing to actually understand it? What are we doing to understand it? Our staff teams, our elected officials, what are they doing to understand it? And what are our constituents, those that are bringing those things to us? How are they understanding it? And is it quick? I've seen this, so therefore it's bad, or is it something that, like a drip of water over time, has just gotten to a place where I can't put up with it anymore? Somebody else needs to help me. And we have a role in that space to say, let's take a beat to understand. I feel like the real skill that we are going to have to begin to practice regularly in this work is actually removing urgency from decision making and pulling ourselves away from it to say, I need to sit with this for a bit. I need to understand what it actually means and what the people who are talking about it are actually saying before I come up with the quick and easy solution. And that is really hard in an environment like we're in, where if you can't get a response to your question in 30 seconds, you're not doing your job.
Well, that's a kind of a like we talked a little bit about like data centers, and we talked about like these complicated sort of issues that have like multiple stakeholders and multiple competing values. And so like what is the skill you need when like facts are incomplete, emotions are high, and everyone is certain that they're right? Because that is ultimately what we face, right? And if you've ever had like we have this custom in Minnesota. We have it's called the Truth and Taxation hearing, and it's always at the end of the budget process where people come and they get their 3 minutes to talk about it. And every one of them generally is upset that the bill is too high, and they are certain that it could be cut. And they didn't participate in the 21 meetings that led up to all of these decisions. And so, right, what we thought was a sort of a slow, methodical process that was trying to be inclusive and spread information, but still, they walk in with they're running hot and they're absolutely certain that they're right. And whatever you did up to that point was totally wrong. And so that's what we kind of walk into and what we try to manage through. And this discernment piece is also a little bit about respectfully pushing back and saying, I get that your emotions are high and you're feeling this way. And there was all of the stuff that went with it. And so, we don't make a lot of decisions willy-nilly. I mean, I think we deliberately try to build systems and processes to like actually have good discussion. And, I made fun of public notices a little bit because they were a little bit antiquated because they were written 150 years ago, but they do help inform some things. And so there's this little balance about what is the right system for pausing, what is the right system for reflection and feedback, what is the right system for wrestling with something that will probably last generations. Because that's the other sweet spot that we have is things that we make last a lot longer than what Arby's is making that day for lunch, or like this developer project that's coming through, or these other things that like require a lot of urgency don't generally last. The things that we do for good reason last multiple generations. And so we do have a kind of a different time horizon, and it forces us to be just a little bit better at the deliberation, a little bit better at the tension of getting it right. And sometimes we do and sometimes we don't, but I do think it's a skill that we can practice and cultivate just a little bit more.
So you talked about what skills are going to be necessary. And I think facilitation is one of the ingredients going forward. This idea that we can convene people and mediate through these things. The idea that, and we talked about groups and social media and all of those things in episode 38, that is where people get their curated information. It is not where curiosity lives. It just isn't. And so I think one of those really interesting skill sets going forward is going to be masterful facilitation, which hasn't always been a priority in city management. I mean, everybody brings in a facilitator to do goal setting because you need the outside third party. And, in my experience, when we would have contentious, usually neighborhood issues where one neighbor was doing something the other neighborhood really didn't appreciate, we would have facilitators in our community, mediators, who would go bring them together and try to find middle ground. And more often than not, it was successful because you could get to the heart of the matter because there was the person, and it's a technique we've all used. So what I hear you saying is, and when that's an independent third party, people just react a little differently. So that's one thing I think is going to be different going forward. Now, the bigger thing, and I haven't talked about my favorite books in a long time, but one of the best books I read a couple summers ago was How Minds Change by David McCraney. And he went through all these case studies about people in really bizarre situations. Like they're ordinary people, but their life experiences are not ordinary. These were the 9/11 deniers. These are people who were born and raised in cults and ultimately left. And so what does it take for a person to change their mind? And so if you've not read the book, put it on your summer reading list. To get someone to change their mind is far more intensive than I think people realize. And the most important element, and I'm totally going to ruin a big chunk of the book by saying this, it's human. It's one-to-one conversation. That's when people change their mind, when the issue becomes humanized and they can understand a different perspective.
So that's a place that maybe we should spend a little time, um, because I think it's an area where I see I struggle with. I'll be the first to say that, but I see the profession struggling with a little bit also, because the art of the one-on-one dialogue is something that I feel like we don't know. Going back to the urgency point, I don't know that we always feel like it's the best way to use our time, right? Winning over one heart and mind at a time takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of energy. It takes you away from a lot of other things. And what's interesting, though, from that standpoint is the power of that individual to drive you to distraction if you don't take the time. And I've seen that lately in some of the issues we're dealing with in our own community. Um, and sometimes, look, it doesn't change those minds. But I've also seen where the ability to have a face to face, even a 5-minute face to face conversation with somebody, will change it, if not their minds, the tone and timbre of the dialogue. It isn't us versus you anymore. It's you and I having a conversation. It's us dialoguing, you telling me what you think, me responding with what I know, and maybe what I think, and then us arriving at a space. It doesn't mean agreement, but perhaps it's awareness, perhaps it's a willingness to be able to think not what you've convinced yourself of. And how frequently do we as individuals sit down face to face across the table or on a bench in an outside space, now that it's beautiful outside, and we should spend as much time outside as we can in the Midwest in the summer because the winters are very long. But when's the last time that you can think of the opportunity where you took it to sit with that problem resident, the person who likes to yell at you, and say, "Hey, it's me. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk." And look, there's risk with that. There's perhaps no reward with that. But what's the downside of a 5-minute face to face where you say, "Hey, I don't understand why you're so upset about this thing. Can we talk about it so that I maybe get a better sense and maybe you're not quite so mad um, at us or at the thing or at whatever it is." And to try that again, it is such a um, it seems like such a simple thing to do, and I've seen success with it. I've seen, I don't want to say failure, but less success with it. And it again, I feel like it's something we talk ourselves out of all too frequently.
So I'm going to say a couple of things. Number one, I love that this conversation happens because someone will invariably say something and I'll be like, oh my God, I just experienced that today. And that actually happened again. So in my organization, as you guys know, we use the HPO model that you can find at Leading Edge at the University of Kansas. And one of the things, one of the sections that we spend a lot of time talking about is engagement in the workplace and our kind of organizations. And um, we talk about, sort of problem residents who are, consuming a bunch of our time, but we also have sort of problem employees in our organization, those actively disengaged folks, that sort of solid 15 to 20% of the organization that's always going to be pushing and prodding and poking and kind of being the saboteur for whatever you're trying to accomplish. You know, I have taken the approach to sit down with those folks and be like, okay, what is it? Is it you? Is it me? Is it us? Is it, you're in the wrong fit. And so just spending time and talking to that sort of disgruntled group yields a couple of things. Number one, it's a sign of respect and like I'm genuinely curious, like why do you hit the laughing emoji every time the city does a Facebook post? Like, what is that about? Help me understand it. Is it because do you wanna make a statement? Is it because you're just, like, bored? Like, I just help me, like, why is that? Like, they actively go out and seek ways to critique what we are trying to accomplish. And it's funny when you confront them, they sort of like, you're paying attention to me? Like, you're noticing these things? And so, you know, spending time to get people to move from being sort of actively disengaged to being engaged is hard, and it is a one-on-one sort of contact sport in our organizations, and it is really hard to do, but, you don't have to get every one of them, you just have to get a couple of them, and then other people start to notice like, "Oh, okay, they shifted, or they changed, or they've kinda got on board with the direction that we're headed. So like, it does feel daunting to try to have to convince everybody that was right, but you just have to have a couple of successes, and then that will naturally bring on those other things because those really loud, angry voices in the community are oftentimes persuasive. They're good at gathering followers. They're good at sort of, you know, stirring the pot and getting others in. And if you can get one or two, they'll magically bring on 5 or 6 other people, and so it doesn't have to be, this constant struggle. The other thing I think, Phil, something you said, like, this inviting of curiosity, of, like, inviting people to say, "Could you take on my perspective for just a moment?" Like, that little bit of invitation demonstrates a vulnerability on our part to offer some outreach and then let people respond to it. Because I've often found over the course of my career, like, if I'm vulnerable first, they're more likely to be vulnerable with me. And so it's this little bit of dance where we kind of like move towards one another. And I think that might be one of those skills, Corey, that you talked about that ICMA ought to include at their conference in Long Beach or future LGRCs is like, how does a leader demonstrate vulnerability without losing positional authority? And I think that's a really hard skill. I think facilitation is a big part of that, but I do think as a profession, we can get better at crafting that.
So I think a common thread to what you just talked about was meeting people where they are. And I remember specific cases where I would go out with the elected official into the neighborhood. And one decision that I will never understand from a policy perspective is there are a couple of neighborhoods in this community where the streets are private. And I know the why, right? Multiple truths can be true. It saved the developer money on the front end. But to a T, I'm pretty sure every homeowner assumed their street was a public street. And public streets come with garbage service and snow plowing and all of those things. But private streets don't, because rarely are they built to public street specs. And that's why they remain private. And so when you have 10 or 20 homeowners going, "What do you mean you don't plow my street? I pay taxes." And then you explain that these decisions were done, and they're like, "We'll just take it over." It's like, no, the system is that it has to be built to engineering specs or it can't. That's one of those arguments where there's really no winning. No one's going to leave the conversation happy. They might be more informed, but no one is happy. But they're at least appreciative you came onto their turf to understand what they see from their perspective. And that's one of those time investments that I always chose to make, was to go to the field and talk to people on their turf. Because coming to sit in a conference room at City Hall is not a very welcoming and thoughtful place if you have a problem. Because you come in with this mindset of, I'm walking into the bureaucratic hall of government, and I'm just, I'm going to be a 30-minute appointment, and then the next thing's going to come along and I'm not going to matter.
As the profession thinks about the skills that are necessary, One is how to cultivate cultures of respect in our organizations, in our communities. Um, Corey, you describing going out onto sort of someone else's turf to learn about their problem is one a signal of I respect you and your challenges. I want to go hear it from your perspective. Is that sign of respect? So I'm going to say, last thing I'll say is close circuit to my friend Booker Hodges. I do think that there is an opportunity for us to talk about law enforcement and respect going forward because it's one of those meaty topics that's probably going to fill out part of the rest of our summer. But so close circuit to Booker, you're going to get a phone call from me probably tomorrow.
Are we deaf to the issues because we're so focused on getting to the outcome, or the urgency that I was talking about before gets in the way of being able to actually sit and listen and discern? And when we allow that extra information into our decision making process, don't we actually find a better outcome? Um, right?
So, so as you were saying that, the question that comes to mind is how do we untether urgency from efficient and effective? Having an efficient government, like trash needs to be picked up, snow needs to be plowed, the parks need mowed this time of year. Those are all good things. Effective systems processes for liquor license or zoning or building permits, all good things, right? But somehow urgency got woven into everything. And I, I believe humanity gets lost in that. And I'm as guilty as anyone else. I say that not from I was good at it at all, because I think I was a striver. And if we did more, more would be better. And I can say very clearly looking back, more was never better. There were never thank yous because more happened. It just exposed what's next. And so, how do we untether that? Or is it just a cultural thing in America?
So I think the answer is we can untether it. It comes down to a little bit of like sort of a rigor in how we think about what the work is. And so as we've been talking about this conversation, right, and this is a little bit of sort of heady esoteric stuff, which is just right in my wheelhouse because I kind of love it. So one of the things that I has been this just popped up, and as you guys know, I take like little crazy notes, and so I've been writing notes about mindsets, right? This mindset of humility that Phil just described, this mindset of the mindset of curiosity. Like I don't know everything, so I'm curious about your perspective. I'm curious about your lived experience. And I have this mindset of respecting where you are and where we're like meeting you where you are. Like that, those are sort of the precursors to having this conversation. The next one is this skill, right? The skill of facilitation and being openness and this skill of like f- thinking through and discerning urgent and important. Because right, if you are a city manager and you get a 1 hour meeting canceled, are you going to go back? Are you going to go through and delete 171 nonsensical emails, or are you going to actually spend time thinking about what does this organization need to do in the next 60 days to make us 10 times better about the work? I would say most often people will go back and like try to delete their inbox and because it's in front of them and it's sort of that little bit of dopamine rush about checking something off the box. But the real answer, the meaningful answer is to say, you know what, I'm going to build some productive capability over here. I'm going to make myself better. I'm going to learn something new. I'm going to have a deepened relationship with a colleague or a friend, or I'm going to do these other things. And so as you described the Eisenhower matrix, like actually looking at our calendar, discerning where we spend time is probably one of those things. And then the last thing I think, well, I'll say is like, so once you've got the skill, you've got to like build the framework and start to like cultivate and create the vocabulary because facts are necessary, but they're not sufficient. Um, the values behind our discussions and our decisions really matter. And Corey, this is going to be right in your wheelhouse and probably a preview for what's next is like, we know different truths can coexist because they're on different horizons. And horizon timelines feels like maybe the next part of our conversation is your urgency horizon is in 5 minutes. The other horizon is the next 10 years, the next 30 years, the next 100 years. And city managers have to get good at horizon switching. And great ones have really long horizons and timeframes. It's not just answering the next call that comes in. It's like, okay, how do we prepare our community so we don't have to answer that call? And that I think is probably the next challenge, the next iteration, and probably the next part of our conversation.
Like I've written a whole essay about this already. And there's 4 horizons, and I think that the challenge, the kind of the cliff notes of it is they're all undergoing a structural change at the same time. And that doesn't happen often in civilization. We just happen to be living through one. But something you just said reminded me. So I talked in a recent episode about tax laws changing and how those impact horizons. And so in the media, you have familiarity with Cedar Rapids. So in the Iowa City Cedar Rapids corridor, there was some coverage this week about how the tax code changing fundamentally changed the revenue streams. Nothing shocking yet, but the school districts had taken out debt service and now can't cover it and are now, and Phil, you talk about being, AAA. When you go on Moody's or S&P's naughty list on the watch list, that's a bad day. Like that's what bad looks like. And so I think the article, it said upwards of 30 different districts were being put on watch status because of something that happened completely outside of their control. And that is also when we look at these horizons, we act as though the world as it exists today is the world. And I mean, we've lived through something historical with SpaceX going public and creating the first on paper trillionaire of history. And it's the first, right? There are some other big IPOs coming this year that may replicate some of that. And all of that is new. It's never been done before. And as we look through these different horizons, then it becomes even more important for discernment and letting go of urgency. Because if you can't steady yourself to see out into the horizon, it's going to smash you.
So as you're talking about that, a lot of things come to mind, and I think we probably could have an episode all about the dialogue that our colleagues are dealing with across the country in terms of decision making taking place that significantly impacts our ability to do our jobs. So decision making at the federal or state level that has completely altered or upended the things that we are trying to do or are required to do or have no choice but to do. In the case of debt service, that was created in an environment that now suddenly doesn't exist anymore. And somehow there are no off ramps to fix that. And what do you do in that space? And I would say the simple answer is I don't know, but we're all going to have to figure it out because it's coming for all of us if it hasn't hit us yet. But one of the things I wanted to point to in terms of the long term um, environment that we're kind of always finding ourselves in the midst of is a story that happened this week. In Springfield, Illinois, many people, if you've ever visited Springfield, Illinois, one of the things you must go see is Abraham Lincoln's home. And it is a national park. You can go through the home itself. There are tours, and it seems like a very typical suburban neighborhood. It's not actually surprising. You walk down there's a visitor center, and then you walk down the street, and there you are. There's Lincoln's house. But we've had some storms blow through, and something happened this week in one of those storms, and a American linden tree, which was the last remaining so-called witness tree, a tree that was in the ground growing when Abraham Lincoln was living in that house and would walk out his front door and see it. The last surviving witness tree that actually was alive when Abraham Lincoln was alive blew down in a storm this week. Now, Abraham Lincoln died in 1865, assassinated, obviously. That's a very long time ago. And to think that there was a living thing that was in place, that has been in place all these years and was felled by a freak windstorm is kind of disheartening. But I want to think about it in the context of what it is that we're doing and the work that we're doing. And Mike said something a while back in this episode about the fact that the work that we're doing is immensely long viewed. We are responsible for decision making that is going to impact generations into the future. So when we find ourselves in the space of urgency and in the space of having to make a quick decision, I think it's important for us to take a beat and think about the witness tree that may be in the decision-making process that we are in the midst of. And what is the thing that is going to be witnessed by people and will witness generations of people in our communities? And how do we make sure that it is a positive witness, right? This isn't something that people grimace and frown upon when they see it or when they experience it. It isn't the story that we tell about the opportunities missed or lost. It's the stories that we tell about the way that that decision made our community stronger, better, more vibrant, more connected, more of a community. And I don't know that we think about it enough, given the urgency that we find ourselves in the midst of. My community has a 10-year CIP. A 10-year CIP is a very long CIP. Most communities are doing 5, some are doing 3, some aren't doing it at all, right? They're just kind of year to year making it happen. And I will tell you, it's so short. 10 years it's like tomorrow is 10 years. What are we thinking about for 100 years, 200 years? We are celebrating very shortly the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the creation of the American experiment. A quarter of a millennium has gone by since that time. And in the context of human history, it's like tomorrow. So what is it that we're all doing that 250 years from now, people are looking back at and saying, what an amazing chance that they took that was outside of perhaps the common perspective, perhaps was risky, but has created something else in this space? Because God willing, our communities are going to be thriving 250 years from now. And those folks are going to look back at us and they're going to say something about the decisions that we made or didn't make. And I think it's important for us, as we're at the dawn, at kind of the precipice of this monumental celebration of the American experience, to think a little bit about the fact that we are not just here for a flash of an eye. And we have a responsibility to make sure that the things that we're doing have a lasting positive impact. And I think when all we're worried about is urgency, that's not going to land in the decision making tree.
Phil, I had no idea that you were going to say any of those things, and I'm just so delighted that you did. They were true, they were inspiring, they were thought provoking, they were there, but that was like, I'm just, I'll just offer like that feels like a really good thing to end on because that little bit of, and I'll tie to Corey's piece in these time horizon things, and the way that you just described right, the blink of an eye of the last 250 years does give us reason to pause from the urgency and to think about the important. And so I got the goosebump thing again because it happens pretty regularly on this show, and so as people know, I get sucked into it and I really love it, and I get them and I talk about them, and so we are so grateful that you all are on this journey with us. Again, we appreciate the feedback, the insight, the likes and the subscribes, and all of the things that happens on a podcast. But um, this is sort of this is a summer series around some pretty weighty stuff, and it feels really good. It actually, this is what's interesting. None of these conversations are urgent in the sense that like where they have to happen, but man, they feel important in the last couple of weeks. And so I'm just really grateful. So now I get to do the little bit where I turn it over to Corey to wrap us up and bring us home. She's laughing on the screen. I can see her. Corey, why don't you wrap us up, please?
So I think it's such a timely topic. And I will say discernment probably wasn't in my vocabulary maybe a month or two ago. But as I've been researching multi system horizons and all of the things I've been looking at, that kind of became the North Star. And so the two words I've been working with and building everything around are coherence and discernment. And those are very much sibling conversations. So, as we enter into the summer series, you may or may not see Phil with us on the next episode. He is doing what is important for all leaders to do and taking some time away and living life in the present. So, Mike and I promise not to break the podcast. Too bad, anyway. And if there are specific, one thing we've talked about that goes with discernment is, we dabbled with it a little bit in the last episode, data centers. We know we want to talk about public safety technology. I have a whole list of kind of ideas and policy issues there. But if there are experiences you're having in communities, and I know I've talked to a few managers recently who got stuck in the media FOIA land over NDAs and data centers and all these things that are happening. If you have a challenge, a topic, something like that, that you want us to brainstorm out loud, please contact one of us. We would love to dissect it. We love thinking on the fly about these kind of things. And we know somewhere out there, somebody will be like, oh, that was super helpful. And that is the whole point we do this. So thank you for joining us for episode 39 of Authenticity FM.